Hi everyone, and welcome to Season 1, Episode 3, The Plot with Hollis Wakefield. Hello all, and welcome back to the Inked Podcast. Today we are going to be doing a rough overview of plot. And here to help me break this down is Miss Hollis Wakefield. So how are you doing today, Miss Hollis?
Hi, I'm doing well. Thank you for asking.
I am so glad to have you on today. This is Hollis's very first episode on the podcast, and that means it is time for me to introduce her to you guys. Now, I will say Hollis has one of the most impressive portfolios I have seen for a young writer, and from talking to her, I can say she's one of the sweetest people I have ever met. And as for Hollis herself, Hollis Wakefield buried herself in classic novels beginning at the age of 14. The unabridged editions of Frankenstein, The Count of Monte Cristo, why am I saying court, guys? The Count of Monte Cristo and other classics held deep meaning which rooted her as she navigated growing into adulthood. Hollis now brings her own twist to the young adult fantasy genre through stories that combine the thoughtfulness of the classics with fast-paced adventure. As a student in her final year of studies at the Author Conservatory, she will be published in Voices of the Future, Volume 6 in June 2025. And some of her current works in progress include a Dracula meets Pirates of the Caribbean young adult fantasy where a brash fisherman and cautious mapmaker join forces to kill a legendary vampire pirate before he steals the soul of a close friend. I love these descriptions, by the way. Her second one is an Aladdin meets The Way of Kings in a young adult fantasy duology where a young snake lord with cobra controlling powers must steal an ancient desert relic to build a new life for him and his sister. She also runs an author Instagram account which has over 14,000 views per month, a growing newsletter of over 250 subscribers, and a street team for her anthology of over 100 subscribers. On the rare occasion that she is not writing, which obviously it seems that she does a lot of, Hollis can be found wrapped in her tortilla blanket while studying philosophy and politics. Or she is whisking herself to a bygone era through 1800s music on her piano and violin. And that is Hollis for you. So obviously, you guys can already tell she's going to have so many great insights today. So again, thank you for coming on today, Hollis. I am so excited to have you. And now that it is time to jump into our questions, are you ready to go?
Yes, and I feel like I should note, ironically, I forgot what I sent you in my bio, but I'm currently wrapped in said tortilla blanket, so I feel like that fits.
Oh my gosh, I love that. You have no idea. My sister-in-law actually has one of those, and it's like her favorite thing ever. And so reading that in your bio just made me like so happy. You have no idea. All right, well, it is time to dive into our first question of the day. So, today we're talking about, as I mentioned before, we're talking about plot. So, Miss Hollis, in your own words, what is plot? Just to kind of give our listeners a little bit of an overview as to what it is.
Yeah, for sure. So plot is, think of it like this structure that enables you to really pour the heart into your story. As a young writer, especially when I was first starting to write novels, I didn't know a thing about story structure or about plot. I just sat holed up in my bedroom writing whatever came to mind. And it was a lot of fun. I called myself a pantser, somebody who just flies by the seat of their pants, comes up with things on the fly. And then when I learned about story structure, I realized, oh, my stories make a lot more sense when I pay attention to how all good stories function. So it's really helped me learn the balance between both being rational and being emotional. I think
Mm-hmm.
just in life, you have to learn to find the balance between that. And especially in writing, it can be easy to assume that writing is something that's fully emotional and you're, hanging out with your characters, the worlds are being built, or something where you have to plan every single step of the way. And neither of those things are true. You need a balance of both. So having plot and a structure for your story to follow allows you to really pour the emotion and the heart into the story that you want to tell.
For sure. It gives you bones for your story basically. So like it's that structure that you can put, like you were talking about, all of these emotions, all of these great topics and themes and things that we talk about into a very real, very like structured form to where your story has like the clear beginning, middle, and end. So I 100% agree with that. And we've talked about this a little bit in your last answer, but our next question is, why is plot so important?
That's, yeah, what I said in my last answer would be exactly why, because our hearts are messy when we put them onto pages. They're just messy in general because we always have a lot of things that we're dealing with, a lot of things that we're learning. It's invaluable to be able to share that with others, but we also need some sort of coherency to it, some sort of structure so that it makes sense to other people.
Yeah,
And I feel like that's what story structure does. It kind of wraps it up in a neat little box with a bow on it, even if what you're learning maybe is messier than that.
for sure. That is very true. Now, something that is a very great tool for young writers and old writers alike, or in between, you can be any range of kind of writer, and that would be a plot chart. One of the most useful tools for me is a plot chart. But our question for you, Miss Hollis, is do you personally use a plot chart?
I kind of have to toss that question back at you. What exactly do you mean by plot chart?
So that is true. We did not clarify exactly what this is. So a plot chart is basically where you have like the physical copy of the plot. So like we know that plot is exposition, rising action, turning point, climax, turning point, falling action, denouement. But essentially what a plot chart is it just has all of these things laid out in a diagram. I will definitely put some kind of example of this. I will create my own if I need to. I will put some kind of visual example of this in our worksheet library on our website as well as probably one on our YouTube channel as well. But basically it's just a physical like embodiment of plot and kind of how it moves. It normally starts like flat and then it goes up into like a triangle and then it's flat again. I don't know exactly how to explain it. It's such a visual thing, but like that's as best as I can explain it on the podcast.
Gotcha. So I don't use a diagram, even though I am a visual learner. For some reason, having a little pyramid doesn't really help my brain. But I do use the three-act story structure, which is essentially what you just communicated, just with bullet points instead of a triangle. And it's been immensely helpful for me to really study each of those plot beats and to learn how what the character is learning interacts with what's happening around them. And it helps me, again, just make my story more coherent and figure out where it goes, have a nice ending that resolves, hopefully, beautifully, if I can land it.
Yeah, so I definitely say that using a like bullet point version of it definitely counts as using one because I know not everybody is weird and likes to use the full chart itself. I don't know what it is about the chart that helps me, but seeing like the visual chart itself normally helps, and I'm not exactly sure why. Again, I'm a little weird in that way. But yeah, so that's just kind of what it is, and I understand why you would do bullet points over that. It makes total sense. So, moving into our next question is how would you said this a little bit. All of these questions are very repetitive, but you know what? We're okay. So our next question is how do you describe how you go about plotting your story? So how do you describe like how you begin and end that process?
Are you talking about the plot itself or coming up with the ideas for the
Just
plot? Or
a
both?
little bit of both, I'd say probably.
Okay, yeah. So for learning to plot a story, I start with the basic elements of story structure, which is why are readers going to like my character? What does my character want? What could they lose? What are they learning along the way? And what force of resistance is in their way? I start with those pieces, try and figure out those core elements, and then translate it into a character arc, a synopsis, an outline, whatever I'm feeling to hone in on the story structure and figure out the beats and where things need to go. On the brainstorming and coming up with the ideas side, that's a whole conglomeration of scrolling Pinterest for hours or building out playlists because I'm very musically oriented or drawing my characters. And especially also getting feedback on the plot that I'm coming up with. I feel like this is a little bit of a side tangent, but for young writers especially, and for me, it's very hard to hand your little seedling of an idea off to
Mhm.
someone else and ask, hey, would you please tear it to shreds and tell me what's wrong with this before I've even written
Yeah.
anything? That is so scary, but it will help immensely, especially in the outlining and the drafting stages, because you've been able to weed out potential
Yeah.
problems in the story that, frankly, you were just close to the story, too close to the story to be able to see. That's something that happens to me. So getting the feedback, lots of music, lots of Pinterest. It is kind of like I was saying at the top of the show. It's a mix of learning how to balance being very rational and being very thoughtful, and then also being very emotional and letting the ideas flow and having fun and coming up with cool worlds. You just learn to balance
Hmm.
the two.
For sure. Well, our final question for today is, do you have any tips for transitions in plot, or just, I would say you can answer this just as writing plot in general, like making sure that your plot flows in general. So yeah, just what's your like biggest tips or pieces of advice for just writing plot so that it flows?
I have two thoughts in regards to that. One is in the outlining stage, in order to make sure your story flows, you need to understand your character's arc very well and what they're learning, because that will dictate what you need to have happen to them externally in the story. You need to know where they begin, where they start realizing that maybe what they're believing is holding them back, and you need to know when they choose to accept that new belief that will carry them forward. And you need to build the plot around that. That's what will make things cohesive. As far as actually writing the story and drafting it, I've learned that I need to be able to let go of the things that I plotted. You know, you pour so much effort and time into coming up with this plot that makes sense, but then you sit down to draft it and you just have to leave room for pantsing and let the story breathe and grow in its own way. And maybe it will divert from the outline, and that's okay because that's what editing is
Oh,
for.
yes, so true. Well, this has been a lot of great insight and a lot of great thoughts from you, Miss Hollis. So, thank you so much for being here for this episode of the podcast. I really appreciate you coming on.
Yes, ma'am, it was a pleasure.
I hope we see much more of you in the future, which we most likely will. And as always, thank you to our listeners for being here, and we will see you in our next episode. Bye, guys. End note. Hi again, everyone. Just popping back into this episode to let you guys know, if you loved hearing from Hollis and you loved hearing about her work, that you can find more about her and about all of her things, her growing platform, her books in the future, everything. You can find all of that at her website, holliswakefieldauthor.com, which I will link in the description of this episode. So I encourage you guys to go check it out because she is a very cool person, and we will see you guys in the next episode. Bye, guys.